Let's talk.
Giles Brown.
Wildly different. The globe-trotting tales of 5 extraordinary women who fought for the right to enjoy the wild places of Earth. It's been described as spellbinding, well worth reading. It is by Sarah Lonsdale. I'm happy to say that Sarah Lonsdale packs her Kendall mint cake, puts on her cagoule, and joins me live from the wilds of somewhere. Sarah, good morning to you.
Morning, Giles.
Where do we find you this morning?
I'm in a very damp and foggy Kent, unfortunately. I can barely see more than about 10 feet ahead of me.
You'll be happy to know it's a very damp and foggy Costa del Sol this morning. We had thunder as well, so we're not all sitting there sipping margaritas and deciding which beach bar to patronise this afternoon. Fear not, okay?
Oh, that's such a shame.
Well, we need, as they keep saying, we need the rain, but now that's quite enough. Now, this is really interesting because I was talking to my first guest about the patriarchy and how it goes to women's history, etc. And we are used to the whole thing about history written about awful men doing awful things to other men and even worse things to women. And then we look at the world of exploration. Right, we think of Dr. Livingstone, I presume, Mallory getting lost up Everest, Cortez out there suppressing the indigenous tribes, people crossing the Andes by Natterjack Toad or something, and it's all blokes, it's all chaps, it's all men. And your wonderful book says, hang on a second, if you're looking at people who are attuned with nature and have got a vested interest in the planet, then I hate to break it to you, chaps, but it's these sisters are discovering it for themselves, Sarah.
Yes, absolutely. And I've found these 5 completely inspirational women from about the turn of the last century, so about 1900 onwards, who were really, as you say, kind of smashing the patriarchy, but actually getting really badly monstered for what they were doing as well, because they were considered to be weird and unnatural and that kind of thing, which is such a shame, really, because in the book, I do ask, do women do the wild differently to men? And I'm not sure whether I can answer that question, but certainly the women do express their sort of connection with nature in a very different way to that masculine attacking a peak or invading a virgin territory or something.
Hacking through the jungle, etc., pulling leeches off each other,
Oh, they had quite a few leeches as well, actually. Yeah. Some of the women kept finding them in their kettles and up their skirts.
Well, indeed. Let's move swiftly onwards for that because we haven't hit the 12-foot watershed yet. But what I'm going to say about this is because if you think Victorian or turn of the century women and nature, you're going to go. You're going to get. It's a bit like you're going to mention the Country Diary of an Edwardian lady. That was a groundbreaking book. 40 years ago, and pressing wildflowers and Beatrix pottering around the place.
Yes. Although, they were doing it. So, for example, Dorothy Wordsworth, who was the famous poet William Wordsworth's sister, lived out in the wilds of the Lake District with him, and she kept the most fabulous diary of their time together, climbing mountains in snowstorms and all that kind of thing. But her diary wasn't published until 1958, even though she was, writing just as beautifully as her brother, I may say so, at the time. And actually quite a few of these women I'm writing about, I had to sort of wade through their unpublished diaries in sort of darkened archives and libraries to actually find their stories.
Yes, so here's the thing. We talk about adventuring, but you mentioned yourself going where no explorer has gone. The corner of archives and libraries and private letters, because presumably women keep this sort of stuff better than men do, and probably a damn sight more better organised, thank goodness. But it must have been. Was it quite hard to find that original material, but you managed to sort of open one portal to these fabulous adventures, and then more sort of dominoes fell into place?
Yes, it was a bit like being a detective, actually, because unlike sort of, great men, there aren't sort of whole archives dedicated to, like Scott or something of the Antarctic. And the ones who were married, often their names were obscured, hidden under their husbands' names, that kind of thing. But it was really interesting kind of piecing together their lives. So one of the women, this incredible explorer entomologist called Evelyn Cheeseman.
Can I just say, by the way, there are some outstanding names in these. There are, Evelyn Cheeseman, with Ethel Haythornwhite and Wangari Maathai. I mean, these are you could just put those on the front of the book. It could be about chemistry. I wouldn't care, because just to find out what these women with names, we don't have names like that anymore, do we? So, it makes Brown look very boring.
And actually, I chose some of them just because of their names.
Yeah, well, quite right too.
Not really.
Yeah. So yes.
But going back to Evelyn Cheeseman,
yes.
So she went to Vanuatu, which was then called the New Hebrides in the 1930s, and she met the king of one of these islands, who was actually very friendly to her, even though they weren't friendly at all to the white men who were there, because the white men kept capturing them and taking off to work in plantations. But they liked her because she gave them aspirin and quinine for their malaria. Anyway, she spent several happy evenings with the king of this island called Molecular, and he gave her a present to take back to her king, who was George V, which was this massive, about 15-foot-long, poison-tipped spear. Which she duly sent back to England. The king didn't really want to have anything to do with the spear, so it's been kept for decades and decades in a sort of warehouse in North London, which is part of the sort of British Museum's overspill. And I tracked it down there. It was the day after the new king's coronation, so it was his great-great-grandfather who was presented this spear. But it was like that. And the British Museum didn't even know it had it. And so, again, I had to persuade them. Yes, I think you do have this spear.
You've got a 15-foot-long poisonous spear from the King of Watanabe, and you don't realise you've got it. I mean, if that's not Indiana Jones and the Temple of Raiders of the Lost Ark final scene, that sort of thing. I mean, that would be over my mantel shelf as a conversation. You want to come back and actually, I better get. I'm going to do. You want to come back and see my 15-foot-long poisonous spear? I mean, that's an icebreaker and a half, Sarah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And in fact, when it did arrive in England, they boiled it in oil, acid, water, alcohol, various other things to try and make it sort of that the king could actually receive it. But even then, he said, no thanks.
No thanks.
Stick it in this warehouse.
Put it in the warehouse. but is she the one who's the entomologist? Is she the insect person? Right.
Yes. So she was the bug hunter. She actually started out her decades-long exploration because she was, in 1917, during the First World War, she became the first woman keeper at London Zoo, because a lot of the keepers had gone off to fight.
Yes.
And she was given the job of keeper of insects at London Zoo. Fairly lowly, but she was really excited because she absolutely loved, even then, she loved bugs and insects. I mean, even as a kid, she would bring in snails and beetles and things to the house where she grew up in Kent. But she turned up really excited. This was her first proper job working with animals in 1917. But because it was the war, all the beautiful exotic butterflies were dead because of sugar shortages. They couldn't feed them. So when she turned up, this dream job of hers, there was literally one aquatic beetle swimming alone in a pool, and that was all she had. So she had to go off literally with her pond dipping net around the rivers and streams of London to try and find exhibits to put in the zoo.
I've got a Disney Plus movie coming up here, with her and the one aquatic bug. A little, they bond, and then there's a musical number at the end, and he's, So, I mean, so did she, did she That's really interesting because the war comes and women are doing, and we all think women are doing men's jobs and the whole thing, but does the war sort of? I'm not saying it's kind of a turning point because obviously the suffragette movement from then, women are able to do things. It takes snail's pace. See what I did there? But snail's pace for the change to come. But is it acceptable for women to sort of don +4s and puttees and hiking boots and take off to the wilds of to the wilds of Borneo, for example?
Yes, well, not really, but it's really interesting. I mean, the war did literally throw everything up in the air, and everything changed. And in fact, one of the other women in my book, Dorothy Pilley, who was a mountaineer, she discovered the mountains for the very first time in her life in the autumn of 1914, because her family used to go on holiday on the south coast every summer. But because the war broke out and large parts of the south coast were then, you couldn't have any access because people were worried about spies coming aboard on shore and things like that. They went to Snowdonia in September 1914, and for the first time in her life, she came face to face with a mountain. And you're absolutely right, though. She couldn't climb it in a skirt, because obviously you can't climb mountains in a skirt. So what she did is she put on some shorts underneath her beautiful long tweed skirt, went to the base of the mountain, took off her skirt when nobody could see her, hid it under a rock, and then climbed up the mountain in her shorts, making sure that nobody noticed until she got back down again and put her skirt back on.
Wow. I mean, the thing is, though, mountain, because now we think mountain climbing, yeah, fine, whatever. But I mean, in this sort of period, I mentioned Mallory to begin with, but mountain climbing was a big thing. I mean, people were climbing in the Alps at this, and this outdoor life. I mean, we don't go down that whole sort of Huxley sort of Brave New World sort of, we must be out there in the countryside because that's going to, because we then get into politics of race and eugenics and let's not go there. But it was that outdoor lifestyle. It was to be out in the fresh air, forget what's his face, Wicks or whatever, Bear Grylls. It was this is what people were being encouraged to do, Sarah.
Well, it was if you were a man,
right?
And the women could, walk gently along the valleys and pluck wildflowers from the hedgerows and sort of laugh prettily.
Yes. A nightingale, look, a nightingale.
But women, you see, weren't actually allowed to climb using ropes unless there was a man leading them. And in fact, Dorothy Pilley, she co-founded the world's first feminist climbing club in 1921 called the Pinnacle Club, and she and two other women in secret climbed an 11,000-foot mountain in Switzerland, manless, they called it, manless climbing, and they didn't tell anybody about it until after they'd come down. And then they said, yes, look, we did it. We're three women. We needed ropes. We climbed to the top of the Mitterhorn, so don't tell us we can't do these things anymore. And of course, all the men said, oh, well, it's so easy now, I'm not going to even bother to climb that mountain anymore, because if a woman can do it, it's no longer a challenge.
Etc. And I love the idea of a feminist women's climbing club. I mean, I think that's now tell me about, because I have been known to muck about in boats, kayaks and fall out of all sorts of aquatic ways of transportation. But you've got one of now is it Mina Hubbard? And she's
yes.
What is she's in Canada, northeast seaboard? Explain, because you piqued my interest.
So she was a Canadian nurse, and she married an outdoorsman called Leonidas, who wanted to be,
Leonidas.
One of the last...
That's a Spartan name and a half, isn't it? Yeah, okay.
That's a good name.
Yeah.
And he went off to the northeast of Labrador, one of the very few unmapped parts of Labrador. This was in 1903, to find the source of a river called the Nascalpie. But unfortunately, he died. It's a very, very severe terrain, and he ran out of food, and he died on the way back. A little bit like Scott, just a mile or two from where they dumped a flower cash. And she decided she would go a couple of years later to finish his work and make this map of the Great Nascaupi River, which is about 300 miles long and goes up right to the Arctic. And she went in a canoe with some native guides. And that was the first thing she did wrong in the eyes of the white community, in that this widowed woman going off with some native guides was absolutely not the right thing to do. So she was completely monstered in the press. You know, she was called hysterical, crazy, insane. You know, what on earth is she doing? But she made this extraordinary, in the end, 600-mile long journey from a sort of halfway up Labrador right to the Arctic Ocean, and made this map of the river, which had never been mapped before. But it's a really beautiful map. I've seen it, and it's a kind of story rather than just simply a map with high peaks and names of rivers and things, in that she draws on the map where her husband died 2 years earlier. She draws on the map where the flower was found. So it's a kind of love story, really, to her dead husband. And I think it's a really interesting way that she, as a woman who, with no kind of surveying or mapping training, chose to draw her map, which was accepted by the American Geographical Society as accurate. But she decided to draw her map in this way of telling a story about her husband. You
see a bloke would have just gone, yes, there's a peak there, and there's a mountain there, and there's some currents there, and there's a rock formation there. And yet she makes it something lyrical almost.
Oh, yes. And also another thing she did, which got everyone cross, was that on the map she also drew evidence of the indigenous population's presence, things like where she found a wigwam, where she found a food store, where she found a fish weir. And of course, part of the myth of the kind of great North American exploration was that this was terra incognita. This was land where nobody had trodden before.
Yeah.
Conveniently ignoring, of course, that for hundreds and hundreds of years, indigenous peoples had lived there very successfully. So that was another reason why they hated her.
Now, we mentioned sort of Wordsworth's sister in the Peak District and the Lake District and all that sort of area. And I didn't realise that the splendidly named Ethel Haythornthwaite is front and centre of this story, the national parks are one of the greatest things that, forget the Industrial Revolution, that Great Britain's ever done.
Oh, I completely agree. And the Peak District, it celebrates its 75th anniversary this year, actually, as the very first national park designated in 1951. And had it not been for Ethel Haythornthwaite, it would never have happened, because when the national parks movement began in the late 1930s, the Peak District wasn't even on the original list of parks. You had the Lake District, you had Snowdonia, you had the Cairngorms. The Peak District wasn't there because most of it at the time was owned by grouse shooting dukes who wanted to keep it private property so that they could slaughter thousands of grouse every year. And they didn't want the working classes from the mills of Sheffield and Manchester trampling all over their grouse moors. And so she spearheaded this movement to get the Peak District on the list. And then very cunningly, because she worked for the National Park movement during the Second World War, she got the Peak District from zero to bottom of the list to right at the very top. And I just want to tell you this fascinating. So she was really obviously interested in conservation and landscape, but she also wanted it for access for all the millions of people who lived around the Peak District. In 1931, there were only 12 footpaths in the Peak District longer than 2 miles in length. You could not get to Kinder Scout. You could not get to Bleak Low. You couldn't get to the highest waterfalls because they were all private.
Right.
Now, 20 years after it became a national park and she managed to win access agreements for it, you had 1,600 miles of public footpaths open. So she was absolutely revolutionary in helping people gain access to the outdoors.
Wow. It's just something we take for granted, isn't it? And, and now we argue about, you can't take your mountain bike across there or your quad. But, when you go from 12 kilometres of path to what did you say, over 1,000 kilometres of path?
1,600 now.
Blimey.
Miles, yeah.
Now...
no... Yeah.
One of the other things is I've only got about sort of another sort of 6 minutes, and I know how we're getting on here, but I want to talk about the because so far we've done a couple of continents, but one of my and listeners will be like beating their head against the wall as set, but I love the Sahara. That's just me, and one of the other. Of these fabulous women is planting trees in sub-Sahara. So explain a little bit about this. Is this a gal from the home counties? Because the name certainly doesn't suggest that she's a sub-posters mistress from Grantham. So explain.
No, so Wangari Maathai,
that's the one
you were talking about. She was born in rural Kenya in 1940, when Kenya was still a British colony, right in the beginning of the Second World War. And she was a sort of farmer's daughter, farm labourer's daughter, went to school barefoot, lived through the Mau Mau uprising, sort of bloody times before Kenya became independent. And she remembered as a child sort of playing with tadpoles in streams and picking up great handfuls of earth and squeezing it and feeling the beautiful moisture inside it. She was a very clever girl. She was what Boris Johnson would call a girly swot. She worked really, really hard. And she got a scholarship to study for her degree in America. And then she did a master's as well. And she was away for about 6 or 7 years. She came back. She got a doctorate. And she started teaching at the University of Nairobi in Kenya. But as the years went on, it was 1970s, she was starting to agitate for women's rights, sort of equal pay and that kind of thing. And she held these big meetings for sort of women academics. And some women from her childhood home in the highlands of Kenya came to one of her meetings, and there was she, kind of academic woman asking for fair pay. And these women who lived in this beautiful countryside where she grew up were saying, we need water. We can't even feed our children. The trees are dying, or they've been chopped down. The rivers have dried up, and there's nothing we can do. We have to walk 10 miles a day now to get water, whereas before it was on our doorstep. And she was absolutely horrified at what had happened over the 20-odd years that she hadn't been in her homeland, is that mass deforestation, mass soil erosion, all flowing out into the Indian Ocean. And so she started this extraordinary movement called the Green Belt Movement, where she started planting trees, and she empowered the sort of local women to nurture trees from sort of seedlings, and they ended up planting 30 million trees over about
30 million.
Yeah, so she got all the women in the farms to buy into it, and they got paid for the trees that they raised from seedlings to saplings. And what's extraordinary is that back in the early 1970s, when she first started this, the forest cover in Kenya was only about 2.5% of the whole land of Kenya. Was only about 2.5%, not enough to retain biodiversity at all. The minimum requirement is about 10%. Now it's about 12 or 13%.
Huge.
And that was her.
Huge difference.
She started this extraordinary movement. But of course she got attacked as well because she was planting trees where rich men wanted to build their sort of private condos. She needed stitches and attacked with pangers and spears and that kind of thing.
Now you interviewed her daughter
Yes.
on this one. What's the big smile there, Sarah? So what's the daughter like? I mean,
she's absolutely wonderful. She actually works in biodiversity herself, and very much inspired by her
If you'd
mother.
said she was working for Hexacon, I would have been very upset, Sarah. If you said, she's become an oil mine, she sold her oil, and she's now drilling for oil in in Kenya. But anyway, please continue. Sorry.
She told me this absolutely wonderful story about the day her mother was announced as winner of the Nobel Peace Prize. She was in Nairobi just having a quiet lunch in a restaurant where the television was on, and they were going to be announcing the winner. She did not expect her mother's name to be announced. They thought that it probably would go to someone from Africa, but they thought there was some medical people in South Africa who were tackling AIDS and things like that.
Yeah.
Anyway, she was just listening, and suddenly the whole restaurant erupted, and she realised they were cheering because her mother had been named as the winner of the Nobel Peace Prize in 2004. And nobody knew who she was. And she just sat there with this enormous kind of smile on her face. And she was so happy because her mother had been persecuted. She'd had to go into hiding. She'd been put in prison many times. She, as a child, was terrified to see her mother on telly, with sort of blood streaming down her face after she'd been attacked. And finally, here she was, kind of vindicated, recognised for what she'd done.
What are you hoping that people are going to take and learn from Wildly Different? Because it reads like an adventure novel, doesn't it, Sarah?
Oh, thank you. Well, I hope people will just have a really lovely time reading it. I love nature. I love the wild, and I wrote about it with all my heart. But I also hope that people will think about the way, perhaps as a species, we need to perhaps reset our relationship with the wild. As I say, some of the glaciers that Dorothy Pilley leapt across now no longer exist. They've melted. The great Nascaupi River that Minna Hubbard canoed up is now under a reservoir for a hydroelectric project. We're just killing our only habitat. And the way we've been doing it for the last couple of thousand years doesn't seem to have worked particularly well. And maybe we need to listen to some of these women's voices, think about connecting rather than dominating, think about sort of harmony and communion rather than just stripping everything bare.
The book is called Wildly Different. It's by Sarah Lonsdale. You can order it via our own virtual bookstore. Go onto the TRE website, click on the front cover, and it'll be winging its way to you. Sarah, if people want to find you online and say lovely things to you and find out more, where's the best place to find you?
I'm on Blue Sky, Giles. Yes, I think I'm Sarah J. Lonsdale on Blue Sky.
Well, you have definitely been Sarah J. Lonsdale. Thank you so much for joining me. Fabulous stories, even better names. But Sarah, it's been an absolute. I love the Nobel Prize story because a certain orange so and so would be spinning about that one. Go and plant 30 million trees, or so and so. The book is called Wildly Different. Sarah, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you, Giles. Thanks.